8 to 10 a.m. and you're listening to...
Right, so let's get to the issue. Let me give you the background story first up, right? So we spoke about it yesterday. We understand that on Friday, the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, gazetted a position coming from Treasury, of course, granting an exemption to Eskom, an exemption from them disclosing irregular and fruitless expenditure in their financial statements. We understand further, they said, it's only for the financial statements and not for the annual report. We then find out, Yellen spoke about the fact that perhaps it was even like an April Fool's joke. It just sounded so bizarre. We then find out there was a similar gazetting a year ago for Transnet. So both of those very important underperforming state-owned enterprises. The question is, what does that really mean? What would be the motive? What are the implications thereof? Let's speak to Professor Sam Koma, who's a governance expert, about it. Prof. Koma, appreciate your time. Good morning and welcome to the Ashraf Garda Show.
Morning, Ashraf. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, let's just see if I can hear you clearer. I'm just struggling for just a moment. Let's see if I can. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me, right? Yeah?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly well, Ashraf.
All right, perfect. I can hear you now. Okay, just as a starting point, you heard about this and you thought what?
Oh, yes. I think there should be a context to this. Of course, and also the Minister of Finance should shoulder the responsibility for dismally failing to explain the rationale and the context informing the gazetting of the exemption of Eskom in terms of reporting on its irregular, wasteful, and also fruitless expenditure in their financial statements. It was only later, after the general public, including civil society as well as media, raised concerns around this, and then he started providing a context. So, Ashraf, there's nothing sinister around this particular decision. There was a due process that was followed, informed by the request that was made by Eskom through the chairman of the board, Mr. Mpoma, asking the National Treasury through the Minister of Finance to consider exempting Eskom from reporting on irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure in their financial statements, but then they will report on this particular matter in their annual report. So that is provided for already in the PFMA, Section 55. It outlines this particular aspect, and also towards the end of the legislation, it does grant authority on the Minister of Finance to consider exempting any of the public entities. It could be Eskom, it could be Transnet, it could also be SAA, or any of the state-owned companies. So what it means in simple terms is that Eskom will not be absolved from accountability, transparency, and also consequence management. Also, Eskom is not exempted in terms of taking steps and measures to prevent irregular, wasteful, and fruitless expenditure as part of ensuring that they put proper internal controls, and also they ensure that there is proper financial governance within the entity. But what does this decision mean in simple terms? One, they're trying to enhance the chances of Eskom improving its credit status and thus being able to access funds and also loans, plus investments from lending institutions and also potential investors. Bearing in mind that Eskom is sitting on 450 billion debt, and government has chipped in terms of assisting Eskom with the implementation of the debt relief loan package of around 254 billion rand in the next 3 years as part of alleviating this huge debt burden that is plaguing the entity. And we should also bear in mind that in the last decade, government has spent close to 420 billion rand on bailouts, and 80% of this 420 billion rand has gone to Eskom. So government is considering this fiscal risk that Eskom is posing to the National Revenue Fund by considering this particular exemption. So there was a request made by Eskom, and the minister considered that, and also it is perfectly within the confines of the legislation.
Okay, so I mean, you said a lot of things. First of all, I mean, if I hear you correctly, you're basically saying it's not a cause for concern.
Not at all, because the accountability mechanisms will still be activated. Parliament will still play its oversight role through SCOPA, through the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises, and also the Auditor General will also still assume a crucial accountability role in terms of the financial reporting of Eskom. But what they're saying is that you will still see this particular element of fruitless and wasteful expenditure and irregular expenditure in the annual report. But we are exempting them from reporting on this in their financial statements. Because the other point that Eskom is raising is that we are part of complying with the JSE requirements, but the other corporate entities and companies that are on the JSE listed requirements are exempted from reporting on this particular expenditure.
All right. And you're saying that, if I can understand you correctly, you're saying that the request for the exemption came from the Eskom chairperson and was not done by the Treasury on their own.
Yes, because they are following what is already provided in the Public Finance Management Act to say you can make a request to be duly considered by the Minister of Finance in terms of asking to be exempted from these provisions that are in the legislation. So, right, as I said, yeah.
Okay, got that right. So you couple of things, right? So you're saying yes, it'll be exempt on the financial statements, but not in the annual report. Okay,
yes.
And if I understand you correctly, you're saying the motivation, right, is that if it is in the financial statements, there will be an alert to the Auditor General, and this is my understanding, that forces the AG to investigate these irregular expenditures, etc., etc., and that effectively is an alert to investors, potentially global investors, into Eskom, and this is a way to avoid that. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes. What I'm saying is that this decision by the Minister of Finance to exempt Eskom from reporting on irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure does not absolve Eskom from the accountability mechanisms, the consequence management that will still be meted out against any Eskom official who happen to be implicated in wrongdoing, corrupt acts, malfeasance, and all of that. Because Section 51 of the PFMA enjoins, obligates Eskom to put measures, to put steps in place to prevent irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. So they are not exempted on that. They are only exempted in terms of saying, okay, if this has now happened, let's not put that or flag it in our financial statements. Let's put it in the annual report. So
right,
that
I hear that part,
yes.
Right? I hear that part, but I just want to get clarity on this. Is the motivation to do that a way of preventing? Because I mean, by its very nature, disclosing irregular and fruitless expenditure, I think everybody listening understands exactly what that means, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a flag that's like, what is irregular and what is fruitless? I want to know what it is. If you remove that and you defer it effectively to like 6 months later, right, at the end of the year, am I right that the motivation is to prevent Eskom being seen in a worse light than it is, which then allows the possible investment that comes from global investors to hopefully invest even before things get any worse? I mean, am I understanding the motivation?
Yes, right? Ashraf, you're quite correct. Eskom is saying when we go into the capital market or when we approach lending institutions or potential investors, they are raising concerns around this irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, which to date it's around, I think, 12 billion rand already. And now that scares off lending institutions and potential investors from borrowing Eskom money or investing in the assets of Eskom, either in terms of construction of new power plants or investing in the independent power producers as part of the program that is put.
So my question, therefore, is like these foreign investors or foreign lenders, if it's deferred to the annual report and not to the financial statements, are we suggesting that they're so naive that they wouldn't know about it? Think about that. We'll get a response from you in a moment. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Ashraf.
Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness. And every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Do you want to make a real impact this Ramadan? Donate your zakah to Ashraful Aid. Your zakah can help feed an orphan, support a widow, build a home for a refugee family, sponsor a HIF student, and much more. With Ashraful Aid, you can make a real difference. Visit our website at www.ashrafulaid.org to make a donation. Make your Ramadan meaningful with Ashraful Aid.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
This Ramadan, spread the winds of generosity across the world with the Al Imdad Foundation. Sponsor a food hamper for just 800 Rand and help us deliver essential food aid supplies to struggling families across 40 countries globally. Let's feed the fasting this Ramadan. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Salam Media, your spiritual companion.
Right, chatting to Professor Sam Koma, who was a governance expert. This and the fallout from what's happened with regards to the gazetting of a ruling here from about Eskom, and before that even with Transnet, where they are now exempt, Eskom in particular now, because it's current, from disclosing irregular and fruitless expenditure in their financial statements, but not exempt in the annual statements. There's been an uproar about it, justified, not justified, legitimate, not, and that's what we're really talking about. So my point before the break to you, Prof. Koma, is that I'm suggesting if the purpose is to effectively show off Eskom in a good light to potential investors and funders, right? Are we suggesting they're that naive that they wouldn't? I mean, they're not even aware of this conversation we're having right now. They would know everything, and if they're really going to put in billions of rands or dollars, why would they not insist on those financials anyway?
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Ashraf. A very good question. Now, if you read the request, which was made by the chairman of Eskom board, Mr. Makwana, already he flagged it to say our lenders, our potential investors have raised this concern with us to say, why not consider being exempted from reporting on this particular element of expenditure in your financial statements, so that eventually and over time you may achieve a clean audit and thus allow Eskom to fully go into the capital market to access funding, loans, and also investments. So already
So that's interesting.
that.
So you're saying, according to the chairperson, that the request actually came from the chairperson based upon the request from potential funders and lenders.
Yes, this is what the letter of the chairman says. This is the letter he presented to the Minister of Finance to consider this decision to exempt Eskom from this particular reporting.
Okay,
yeah.
That is so fascinating. Right, now you also know there's been an uproar, and you made the point from your first lines. There's an uproar from activists to media across the board, right? So with hindsight now, is that uproar justified or not?
Of course, it is justified, but as I said earlier, the problem is that when the minister gazetted this exemption last Friday, he did not give us any plausible explanation, any context to this. It is only after there was a reaction out in different quarters, then they said, oh, let's give a context. And if you read the second media statement from the Minister of Finance or through National Treasury, they're now saying, no, this in fact flows from the Zondo Commission's final report. It's a recommendation, by the way, in the Zondo Commission's report to say National Treasury and the Auditor General must review the usefulness of the concept of irregular expenditure.
Okay.
So it's only now that they're giving us the context.
All right. Now you also know that critics, right? Well, I mean, two parts there, right? Firstly, the lack of information on Friday is in terms of explaining the why, right? And that I see yesterday, the acting DG of Treasury, Ismail Mamuniat, in fact, conceded that with hindsight, we earn on that. So it's good that he conceded that, right? But I mean, it does sound rather bizarre, firstly, that they would not want to explain that. They've conceded, but it sounds crazy that they would think that South Africa, with its robust activism and media and voices are not silenced like in many other countries in the world, we'd not pick it up.
Yeah, you're quite right, Ashraf. It's just sheer incompetence coming from the ministry and also the National Treasury. But now they are duty bound to go all out, convene media briefings, and also ensure that they are able to properly explain the rationale behind this particular decision. And that will, to some extent, help to allay the fears and also to allay the concerns of the various stakeholders who have already raised fundamental questions around this particular decision. So
okay,
the policy
subsequently,
yeah.
All right. And subsequently, of course, we found out that it's happened now to Eskom, but also to Transnet exactly 1 year ago, right? So was it understandable, considering South Africa's biggest problems of what has undermined our entire state has been the issues of state capture and corruption on a mega scale, right? Is it understandable that critics would see that as a flag, a red flag, to say, what is this? Is this a way to hide, not so much hide further issues of corruption, but simply to hide acts of corruption in the past away from the public? I mean, is it understandable that there would be that sort of reaction?
You're right, Ashraf. The criticism is constructive. As citizens, as media, as civil society, we should always remain vigilant, given the history of state capture and also issues of corruption in the state, including its state-owned companies. So it is correct for us as ordinary members of the public, as media, as active citizenry, plus civil society organizations, to continuously raise these concerns and also seek answers and proper explanation from the decision makers. So it is the right step in terms of taking a stance on this particular decision that was made by the Minister of Finance last Friday.
Okay, last thing here, right? All things done and dusted, although it's not quite done and dusted. What's the big lesson you have learned from the last few days?
Oh yeah, lack of proper communication, and also due diligence coming from the National Treasury and also the Minister of Finance. In fact, it is quite disappointing that having learned from the lessons of the state capture, you remember how the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Des van Rooyen, was appointed, and also what came out of the Zondo Commission in terms of the revelations, in terms of the serious lapses of governance that took place within the entity. We are now sitting with more or less the same situation in terms of lack of clear answers and also proper direction coming from the leadership of the Minister of Finance and also Eskom.
Okay, and redemption from that?
Yes, of course, they have to redeem themselves. As I said, they now need to go all out and explain to the ordinary member of the public what informed the decision to exempt Eskom from reporting on this particular element of irregular expenditure, wasteful expenditure, and also fruitless expenditure. Are you hiding corruption or acts of fraud and malfeasance, or what is it that you're trying to achieve? And if they properly explain the rationale behind this and the stated objectives that they intend to achieve over the next 3 years, that will go a long way to members of the public to make sense of this.
Absolutely. Bottom line, if they didn't get it before, they better get it now, particularly with the 2024 election coming up, that ultimately it's all about we, the people. Appreciate your time, Professor Sam Koma. Thank you for that, for those very important insights into understanding what has happened around Eskom and the Treasury over the last few days. Thank you for your time.
Cheers.
There we are. Lessons learned indeed. You can add your comments as well on any of the social media platforms where this feed is being posted through on Solar Media. By the way, with that in mind, besides Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, do hit follow and like on the Solar Media YouTube page. Okay, do follow Solar Media and follow me. Certainly want to hear from you. Now, there's a big issue in India. We spoke about it a few days ago about an attack on an imam. And then he had his beard cut off by people. We'll find out what those people were. There's been a sequel to that. There's been now an attack on a mosque in India, and the mosque was burnt down, so I understand. Let's find out about that right after this.